Inside ADX Florence, America's toughest prison. There is a prison in the United States designed not to rehabilitate, not to socialize, and not to be temporary. It was built to isolate. Here, some prisoners spend 23 hours a day alone, year after year, with minimal human contact. The silence is intentional. The architecture is deliberate. And every detail serves a single purpose: control. This is ADX Florence, officially known as the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility. It is widely regarded by correctional experts, journalists, and former officials as the most secure prison in America. And today, we're going inside. Before we begin, if you value deeply researched, fully factual prison documentaries like this one, please like this video and subscribe to the Inmate Diaries. Your support directly helps us continue sharing accurate, in-depth stories that rarely get told. Now, let's step inside ADX Florence. Why ADX Florence exists. ADX Florence did not appear out of nowhere. Its creation was a response to a crisis inside the U.S. federal prison system. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the Federal Bureau of Prisons faced an escalating problem: inmates who were so violent, influential, or escape-prone that no existing facility could safely contain them. High-profile assassinations, hostage situations, and inmate-on-inmate murders occurred even within maximum security prisons. One event, in particular, became a turning point. In 1983, 2 federal correctional officers were murdered on separate occasions by inmates at the U.S. Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. Both officers were killed during routine duties. The perpetrators were already considered dangerous, yet existing security measures failed to prevent the attacks. In response, Marion was placed on permanent lockdown, inmates confined to their cells nearly all day. This experiment became known as the Marion Model. Federal officials took note. They concluded that the system needed something more permanent, more controlled, more absolute. The result was ADX Florence. Construction began in the early 1990s, and the facility officially opened in 1994. Its purpose was explicit: to house inmates who could not be safely managed anywhere else in the federal system. Not the most famous prisoners. The most uncontrollable. Location by design. ADX Florence sits near the small town of Florence, Colorado, population just a few thousand. The location was not chosen for convenience. It was chosen for isolation. The surrounding terrain is open, dry, and sparsely populated. Winters are harsh. Visibility stretches for miles. Escape would be immediately noticeable, and extremely difficult. The prison itself is part of a larger federal correctional complex that includes lower security facilities, but ADX is physically and operationally separate. Even within the complex, ADX stands apart. Former Bureau of Prisons officials have stated that the remoteness reduces outside interference, limits escape opportunities, and ensures complete perimeter control. There are no nearby urban centers. No crowds. No anonymity. Everything about the location reinforces the same message: once inside, movement is restricted, in every sense. Architecture of control. ADX Florence was designed from the ground up using behavioral and security research. This is not a traditional prison layout. Cells are constructed of poured concrete, walls, floors, and ceilings. Furniture is built in. Beds, desks, and stools are formed from solid concrete slabs. Each cell measures approximately 7 by 12 feet. Inmates eat alone. Exercise alone. Sleep alone. The small window, often described as a slit, is positioned so inmates cannot see the horizon or other prisoners, only the sky above. According to the Bureau of Prisons, this design minimizes communication, coordination, and confrontation. Even sound is controlled. The ventilation system was engineered to prevent voices from traveling between cells. Doors are electronically operated from a remote control center. Human contact is intentionally limited. This is what officials call total separation. Supporters argue it prevents violence. Critics argue it causes psychological harm. Both claims are supported by different bodies of evidence, and that debate continues to this day. Daily life inside a cell. For most inmates at ADX Florence, daily life follows a rigid, repetitive structure. Inmates typically spend 22 to 23 hours per day inside their cells. Meals are delivered through a narrow slot in the door. There is no communal dining. No shared recreation. No casual conversation. Exercise, when permitted, occurs alone, usually in a small, enclosed concrete yard sometimes referred to as a dog run. Some yards are open air, others are partially enclosed, depending on security classification. Showers are also solitary. According to publicly available Bureau of Prisons policy, reading materials are allowed, and inmates may possess limited personal items. Access to television is rare and depends on behavior level. Communication with the outside world is tightly regulated. Phone calls are infrequent. Visits, when allowed, are non-contact and conducted through thick glass. Mail is screened. Every movement is scheduled. Every interaction is monitored. Time does not pass quickly here. It stretches. Who gets sent to ADX Florence? ADX Florence is not assigned randomly. Inmates are sent here after extensive review. Most arrive following serious incidents at other facilities, including assaults, murders, escape attempts, or leadership roles in violent organizations. Some are convicted terrorists. Some are organized crime leaders. Others are repeat prison attackers who continued violent behavior even in maximum security institutions. Importantly, not every inmate is assigned to the most restrictive housing indefinitely. The Bureau of Prisons maintains a step-down program, theoretically allowing inmates to earn reduced restrictions over time through compliance and behavior. However, critics argue that progression can be slow and inconsistent. The exact criteria for placement and advancement are not fully transparent to the public. What is publicly documented is this. ADX Florence houses inmates deemed the highest risk in federal custody. It is the final stop. The silence. Former inmates, attorneys, and human rights observers frequently describe ADX Florence using the same word. Silence. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of human presence. Unlike traditional prisons, there is no ambient sound of crowds, shouting, or movement. That silence is intentional. BOP officials argue it reduces stress, conflict, and impulsive violence. Mental health professionals, however, have raised concerns. Multiple lawsuits have alleged that prolonged solitary confinement can worsen or create psychiatric conditions. Some cases resulted in settlements or policy changes, though ADX Florence continues to operate under its original core model. The legal and ethical debate surrounding extreme isolation remains unresolved. What is not debated is this. ADX Florence was built to be quiet. And it succeeds. ADX Florence was designed to contain the most dangerous inmates in America. But over time, it became something else. A symbol. A warning. And a place that continues to raise difficult questions about security, punishment, and the limits of isolation. The men inside and the system that holds them. The most restrictive population. ADX Florence does not house a typical prison population. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, inmates assigned to ADX represent less than 0.1% of all federal prisoners. Placement is reserved for individuals who present an extreme security risk, either due to violence, influence, or escape history. The population has included leaders of violent extremist organizations, high-ranking organized crime figures, inmates with repeated assaults on staff or other prisoners, individuals involved in major acts of domestic or international terrorism. Importantly, placement at ADX is administrative, not a sentence imposed by a judge. Inmates are transferred following Internal Bureau of Prisons review processes. While the BOP states that ADX placement is reviewed regularly, the exact timelines and criteria for release from ADX conditions are not fully disclosed publicly. This lack of transparency has been a focal point of criticism from civil liberties organizations. High-profile inmates. Over the years, ADX Florence has housed some of the most notorious criminals in modern U.S. history. Among them, Ted Kaczynski. Convicted for a nationwide bombing campaign that killed 3 people and injured dozens between 1978 and 1995. He was held at ADX Florence for years due to security concerns before being transferred later in life for medical reasons. His isolation conditions were documented in court filings and media reporting. Ramzi Youssef. One of the architects of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Due to the severity of his crimes and perceived ongoing threat, he was placed under highly restrictive conditions at ADX. Zacarias Moussaoui. Convicted for his role in the September 11 attacks. Moussaoui was transferred to ADX Florence following disruptive and violent behavior at other facilities. Robert Hansen. A former FBI agent convicted of espionage. Due to national security concerns, he was held at ADX under strict isolation until his death in custody in 2023. These inmates were not placed at ADX for notoriety, but for risk. Federal officials have consistently stated that ADX is used when no other environment can safely contain a prisoner. The Step-Down Program. While ADX Florence is known for extreme isolation, it also includes a multi-phase step-down program. In theory, inmates who demonstrate sustained compliance can progress through stages that gradually increase human contact, recreation time, and privileges. The program includes long-term solitary confinement phases, intermediate units with limited group interaction, transitional housing leading to transfer to other high-security prisons. The Bureau of Prisons describes this as a pathway out of ADX. However, multiple lawsuits and investigative reports have alleged that progression can take years or decades. Criteria for advancement are unclear to inmates. Mental illness can hinder participation, effectively trapping some prisoners. In 2015, a class action settlement resulted in policy changes, including improved mental health screening and increased review of placements for inmates with serious psychiatric conditions. Despite these reforms, ADX Florence remains one of the most restrictive prison environments in the world. Mental health controversy. Mental health is the most controversial aspect of ADX Florence. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and human rights organizations have repeatedly raised concerns about prolonged isolation. According to court testimony and medical expert reports, extended solitary confinement can exacerbate anxiety, depression, and psychosis. Sensory deprivation may cause cognitive decline over time. Some inmates entered ADX with no diagnosed mental illness and developed symptoms later. The Bureau of Prisons disputes claims that ADX inherently causes mental illness, stating that mental health services are available. Inmates are screened prior to placement. Severe mental illness disqualifies inmates from long-term ADX confinement. The truth lies in documented legal records, not speculation. Courts have ruled both for and against plaintiffs in various cases, leading to partial reforms but not closure of the facility. The debate remains active. No escapes. Since its opening in 1994, there has been no confirmed successful escape from ADX Florence. This is often cited by federal officials as proof of the prison's effectiveness. Security measures include multiple perimeter fences with razor wire, motion sensors and armed patrols, continuous camera surveillance, controlled movement protocols. Inmates are moved individually, often restrained, and escorted by multiple officers. Even within the prison, movement is minimized. From a purely security standpoint, ADX Florence has achieved its primary goal. At a cost, both financial and human, that continues to be debated. International scrutiny. ADX Florence has attracted international attention. Organizations including the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture have criticized prolonged solitary confinement, arguing it may violate international human rights standards when used long-term. The U.S. government has rejected claims that ADX violates international law, asserting that conditions meet constitutional requirements. Reviews are conducted regularly. Isolation is necessary for safety. No international court has jurisdiction over U.S. federal prisons, but the criticism has shaped public discourse and legal challenges domestically. ADX Florence stands at the center of a national argument. Supporters see it as a necessary safeguard. A place where the most dangerous individuals can be contained without further harm. Critics see it as a symbol of excessive punishment and isolation. Cost, comparison, and the question of the future. How ADX Florence compares to other Supermax prisons. ADX Florence is often described as the most extreme example of a Supermax prison, but it is not the only one. Across the United States, several facilities were designed to isolate inmates deemed especially dangerous. However, correctional experts consistently note that ADX Florence operates at a level of restriction that exceeds most others. One of the most frequently compared institutions is Pelican Bay State Prison in California. Pelican Bay's Security Housing Unit, SHU, also relied heavily on long-term solitary confinement. Inmates there spent years, sometimes decades, in near-total isolation. However, following extensive litigation and a landmark settlement in 2015, California significantly reduced the use of indefinite solitary confinement and revised its classification policies. ADX Florence, by contrast, remains governed by federal authority and has not undergone comparable systemic restructuring. Key differences frequently cited by researchers include: duration. ADX placements often last longer than state-level Supermax assignments. Federal scope. ADX houses inmates from across the entire country. National security cases. ADX uniquely holds inmates tied to espionage and terrorism. While several states have moved away from extreme isolation models, ADX Florence continues to operate largely as originally designed. The cost of total control. Operating ADX Florence is expensive. According to publicly available federal budget documents and congressional testimony, the annual cost per inmate at ADX Florence is significantly higher than at other federal prisons. Estimates reported by media and government oversight bodies have placed the cost at more than double that of housing an inmate at a standard high-security facility. Contributing factors include higher staff-to-inmate ratios, advanced surveillance and electronic control systems, extensive security infrastructure, specialized training for correctional officers. Federal officials have defended the cost, arguing that the alternative, allowing high-risk inmates to operate within less restrictive environments, could result in violence, deaths, or escapes. Critics counter that prolonged isolation increases medical and mental health expenses, potentially offsetting any security benefits. Exact cost figures vary year to year and are not always broken out publicly for ADX alone, making some financial details unclear. What is clear is that ADX Florence represents one of the most resource-intensive correctional environments in the United States. Staff inside the system. Life inside ADX Florence is not defined solely by the inmates. Correctional officers working at ADX undergo specialized training to operate in an environment built around isolation and control. Former staff members interviewed by journalists have described the job as highly procedural, emotionally demanding, focused on vigilance rather than interaction. Unlike other prisons, officers at ADX have limited verbal engagement with inmates. Many duties are conducted remotely, opening doors electronically, monitoring cameras, and enforcing strict movement schedules. Some former staff have reported psychological strain associated with working in such an environment, though comprehensive public data on staff mental health is limited. The Bureau of Prisons has stated that employee wellness resources are available, but details specific to ADX are not publicly documented. What remains undisputed is that the prison's design affects everyone inside, not just those behind the cell doors. Legal challenges and reforms. ADX Florence has been the subject of repeated legal challenges. Inmates have filed lawsuits alleging that prolonged solitary confinement constitutes cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. Some cases were dismissed. Others led to significant outcomes. The most notable resulted in a 2015 settlement that required the Bureau of Prisons to improve mental health screening before ADX placement, remove inmates with serious mental illness from long-term solitary confinement, increase oversight and review processes. The settlement did not shut down ADX Florence, nor did it eliminate solitary confinement as a core practice. Instead, it introduced guardrails. Since then, the Bureau of Prisons has stated that it complies with the settlement terms, though external monitoring has been limited. Legal scholars note that ADX Florence now operates in a narrower legal margin than it did during its early years. Whether those constraints are sufficient remains a subject of debate. International law versus U.S. practice. On the international stage, ADX Florence is frequently cited in discussions about solitary confinement. The United Nations, through its Special Rapporteur on Torture, has argued that solitary confinement lasting more than 15 days may constitute cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. The United States has formally rejected the assertion that its use of solitary confinement violates international law. U.S. officials maintain that ADX conditions are constitutional. Isolation is used for legitimate security reasons. Inmates receive medical and mental health care. There is no mechanism for international enforcement against U.S. prisons. As a result, ADX Florence continues to operate under domestic legal standards, not international ones. The disagreement highlights a broader divide between global human rights frameworks and U.S. correctional policy. The future of ADX Florence. More than 3 decades after its opening, ADX Florence remains active. There has been no official announcement of plans to close or replace it. However, its future is not immune to change. Factors that may influence what comes next include ongoing litigation, shifts in federal correctional philosophy, budgetary pressures, growing scrutiny of solitary confinement practices. Some experts predict gradual reform rather than abrupt closure. Others believe ADX Florence will remain untouched, a permanent fixture for the most extreme cases. At present, its role is unchanged. It stands as the final containment option in the federal system. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with us. ADX Florence isn't just a prison, it's a reflection of how far a system is willing to go in the name of security, and the difficult questions that come with that choice. If you value fully factual, deeply researched prison documentaries, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the Inmate Diaries, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Your support allows us to keep telling these stories with accuracy, depth, and respect for the truth. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next chapter.